We think it does. We pulled together over winter break the research division and curriculum instruction assessment, and we looked at best practices for actual administration of test and test format familiarity. We came up with recommendations. Most of our schools adjusted based on those recommendations. I think this year our last high school, South High, will be changing the way they administer their norm reference tests to small group settings. There was a time period when what Mrs. Godding is describing was true. You'd have 400 kids in an auditorium taking a test versus a small group setting with the math teacher, 25 to 30 kids. And so the environment does have some impact.
Okay. Well, I'm also talking about getting the test done in 2 days.
Oh, sorry.
A high school that gets the test done in 2 days versus a high school that stretches it for 2 weeks because of either technology issues or scheduling issues. And so I'd be curious to know if the condensed amount of time, because I know from my own experience with kids, if you tell them you're going to get this done versus you're going to stretch it over a longer period of time. So I'm curious to know on that. The other question I've got is when I look at that difference between 6th and 7th grade, and we certainly hope that middle school configuration will allow that 6th and 7th and 8th grade to flow upward. But I had a question recently from a parent regarding the curriculum that we use at the elementary level in math is different than the curriculum we use at the middle level, and whether or not, and she found that her child was having a challenge with terminology, switching from one learning to another learning. So my question is, when a child moves out of an elementary setting and the curriculum that's used there, what do our middle school teachers do to help address those terminology questions and the explanation of how to do things compared to how they learned at elementary? And I think back to a session that Ms. Williams and I went to in the spring regarding, it was really about 3rd grade readiness, but what it really came down to was a conversation about fluency in the language and understanding what was happening. So if one teacher says it's the total and another teacher says sum, and you're maybe an ELL student, and sum may mean S-O-M-E and sum to the teacher meant S-U-M, how confusing is that? And so I guess that's my question there, is just that since I've had the question from a parent of my child is struggling with this switch from elementary curriculum to middle school, what are we doing to help with that alignment piece of it?
We actually were able to look into that question today, so thank you so much for asking it earlier. We went through all the NISA-M data to see if there's any pattern emerging between 6th graders in elementary versus 6th graders in middle school. We don't have one.
Okay.
We actually looked, I'll give you Buffett and Mars. At Buffett, for example, 5th graders using Go Math were 85% proficient, while 6th graders using Glencoe Math were 86% proficient. So we're not seeing a change, but what we do know matters is the vocabulary. So we have standardized 90 academic vocabulary terms per subject, per grade level for every student, so that every teacher in the district uses those same academic vocabulary terms, and they're aligned with Nebraska content standards, which then align with NISA. The reason that's so important is 60% of your success on the math exam is if you understand the vocabulary, because they're story problems.
Right.
And so we are being consistent with the vocabulary used. And we do provide that to all teachers. We started that 5 years ago. We reinforce it every year, and we talk about it during our training sessions. So, but the Glencoe was what was available when we purchased our secondary math.
Right.
We might have gotten Go Math through 8th grade had we had that material. It wasn't produced yet at that time. It was a few years ago.
Right. So I would just ask us to be really thoughtful as we are moving 6th graders into middle schools and thinking, Buffett being 5th and 6th grade in the same building, but as we see 5th graders in an elementary building and then 6th graders to a middle school, whether or not that alignment is happening in the same way. Ms. Williams?
I just wanted to touch base. Mr. Scanlon stepped out of the room for a moment, but I just wanted to touch base, and I know he was talking specifically about poverty and not really kind of the racial background And I've just really been pondering, Mr. Evans and I presented at the African American Leadership Council, and I would have to say, we have the opposite. We have our achievement councils, and so I think that the information disaggregated is very important to those councils and to the communities. And so although we are focused on poverty, we also need to be presenting and continue to look at the disaggregated information for those particular councils, and as well as those communities that are directly impacted by that. And I mean, we shared similar data, and that was the overwhelming response was, we want to see what our kids are doing, not what everyone's doing as a whole, but what are our kids doing and how do we best support those. So just wanted to put that out there and just be mindful that we always continue to disaggregate that information for our communities and our achievement councils. And at some point, we do need to look at, have a sit-down conversation with each of the achievement councils, and which is another agenda item down the road, but how are we really helping them and vice versa, and how are we having more achievement with all of our races and cultures. So I just wanted to put that out there because it kind of crossed my mind after the fact.
Absolutely. And we have partnered with numerous councils for that purpose, and look forward to partnering with many more. Absolutely.
Mr. Vargas.
I just want to echo that. I'm in agreement with Ms. Williams. I wanted to make sure to say it as well. I think it's important for our councils, but I'll even, from what I've heard, not just from, let's say, South Omaha community, but it's important that we have that data for the different communities, but it's also important recognizing we are an urban city that has tremendous diversity, and I think that's an extension of these committees, but I think it's also an extension that if we don't collect that data, we can have blind spots, cultural blind spots, that we are potentially creating systems of inequity for different populations of students, and I know we don't want to do that. So I echo that, and I'm just glad to say that. That doesn't mean that we're not measuring poverty. We're measuring poverty, but it would be a disservice to the community if we did not also measure not just African American, Latino, but every subgroup that we can, that we have a growing subgroup or refugee population, English learners, so that we don't have any blind spots.
Okay, are there any other questions? Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam President, and I apologize, I'm on some cold medication tonight, so you might want to stay back there, so things are a little foggy tonight, although it's not all bad, but I do want to say that I am coherent enough to know that we've had some really good conversation, and so I want to thank the board and the staff, because we spend a lot of time on conversations that oftentimes aren't related to student achievement. We spend a lot of time on conversations that are still needed to be done. Certainly bond issue is an important issue, and how we do that's important to everybody. But the conversation that I just heard from multiple board members, those are the kind of conversations we have with principals, with teachers, with staff, trying to figure out where are we at and where are they at as an individual school. Those are the conversations that 4 EDs behind me have. Those are the kind of conversations I have with cabinet level folks. What are the strategies we're using? What's the difference it's making? And if it's not, what are we going to do different? And how are we going to make sure that tomorrow is better than it is today, and is today better than it was yesterday? And those are the kind of questions I kind of just now heard, even with the cold medicine. I heard those quality conversations. So I want to thank everybody for that. I think that is critical, that we always think about that. How do we get better for every single young person we serve? That's why I wake up in the morning. I think that's why all of us that are at this table wake up. How do we make it better for every single young person we serve? How do we find a way that engages them, that creates a quality instructional setting so that they're going to have more success? Clearly, we don't have all those answers, but clearly we've got some evidence here that says we're going the right direction. And I guess I don't want to leave this conversation without saying, as I look at an achievement gap that's diminishing in state assessment scores, as I look at proficiency rates that are going up in assessment scores, I want to thank our teachers. I just want to say that. Thank you, teachers, for what you're doing. Anyone who might be watching at 9:42 at night, I want to thank you for what you're doing. Our principals, our building leaders, our folks that are out there every single day dealing with all kinds of things, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, all kinds of things. And they find a way to step up to the plate and make a difference in the lives of kids. We've got some evidence of that right now, and I just want to say thank you to those teachers, thank you to those building level leaders. I don't want them to lose track of the fact that we recognize they're making progress. Can we get better? Absolutely. We must. We have to. No doubt about it. But I appreciate the great conversation. You guys, it's the conversation we need to have. How do we keep developing a system in a district that meets the needs of all kids? And that's the big challenge, and that's the one that we have to meet above all else, is being able to demonstrate that we're having student success stories. So thank you, Madam President and Board.
And I would just encourage everybody to go out to the detailed report. One of the things that I was most impressed by was that OPS to state gap decreasing, and to me that speaks volumes, because sometimes you say, okay, well, was the test easier or harder this year? And when you can take a look at what the state results were compared to us, that really speaks volumes as to how we're doing. So thank you all so much. And if anybody thinks of additional questions or you want additional data, get that to Mr. Ray, and we can work on bringing some of those things I've written down, Mr. Vargas, some of your questions, and some of the other ones we've had tonight, to be able to put into our calendar. But thank you so much. And with that, we will move to our one action item, J2A, Omaha Public Schools Academic Eligibility Update. I asked staff this morning, so it was a late add to the board agenda, but I asked them to provide a red line strike-through version of the changes so it's the last document on the agenda for us to be able to see. So I don't know who's presenting, or Dr. Kerber?
Well, what we've provided you is the information you saw last time, and you've got it two ways. Thank you, Mrs. Godding. She asked for the strike-through version, so that's available, as well as the updated version. And Mr. Eubanks is here if you've got any questions, but it was reviewed at length last time. But in case you do have questions, we'd be happy to have those answered.
Does anybody have any questions on this? And we did ask staff to bring that back for this board meeting specifically because as we think about students getting ready to try out for basketball in a couple of weeks, we wanted to make sure we weren't eliminating the opportunity for students to try out who could say, oh, I can correct myself in a 2-week time period versus a 9-week time period. So we wanted to get that back in front of the board for you. So
I don't remember talking about at all removing the waiver option. Why was that removed?
It's a great question. I believe that the committee and the athletic directors thought that the 2-week period kind of acted as a waiver, and a student could use that 2-week time to get in good academic standing. So that, in essence, would be the waiver. So the waiver is already built in, would be my understanding.
But the policy doesn't allow for, let's say, a kid has a parent going through cancer treatments and is struggling in school. That could last 6 to 8 weeks. Even with 2 weeks, if they don't get their grades up, there's not a waiver there. And that could be the only reason why the kid is still even functioning at that point. And the reason I say that is because I hope this board recalls when this was first introduced, the waiver option was important to the community to allow kids who mess up or have a traumatic event happen in their life that they still had some leeway. 2 weeks isn't necessarily going to solve that.
So is that item B4, Mr. Wayne, is that the only place where the waivers, I just want to make sure.
Yes,
It's B4.
Correct.
Okay.
And I understand the rationale behind it, but
In what we're proposing, I believe is more proactive in nature. But I guarantee every athletic director that is, has their feet on the ground would be in favor of a waiver, but in the new proposal, not sure how that would fit in terms of a 9-week waiver or an 8-week waiver. I'm not exactly sure how that would fit, since the 2-week time period for a student to getting good academic standing is already built in. But you're preaching to the choir. It's all about kids, and we know, I'm telling you, we know that athletics and activities can save kids. It keeps them in school. We're huge proponents for that.
So, Mr. Wayne, is your question more related to that longer-term whole semester where you could just have the waiver for the entire semester if you're going through a difficult?
So walk me through, if a kid flunks every class first semester, are you saying he's now eligible, or she's now eligible second semester?
No. If a student, and because it's live grades, it's every 2 weeks. So a student that has multiple failing grades on his or her grade report every 2 weeks would be judged upon that. So if the student failed everything first semester, every single class, that student athlete then come second semester would be ineligible until he or she could show that they're in good standing in all the classes.
But that would be the new year, so they would be in good standing. So let's take basketball, for example. Kid is failing November through December. And again, the waivers are typically for like the exceptions. That's why it's underneath exceptions. But you have basketball failing November, December, now becomes eligible in January. 9/10 out of 10, that kid's not going to play that year. So we're not truly dealing with the hardship, which is what the waiver was entitled to, was we were trying to do.
Mrs. Fay.
So I'm glad we have the red line version, because I didn't realize, and along the same lines, that we were eliminating the or a cumulative GPA of 2.0, because that addresses the exact same thing. So the reason that we added the cumulative 2.0 is for the student who is a stable student but has an exceptionally bad quarter or whatever it is, but is not a chronically bad struggling student. So by eliminating that cumulative 2.0 and the waiver, I don't know. I didn't realize that was gone, and so I'm struggling with the whole concept of with the whole thing. I guess now I have more questions. That's what it comes down to, and how it impacts the student who's falling into some of these exceptional circumstances that Mr. Wayne is illustrating.
And the reason why I bring it up is there is a kid that I'm working with right now that will miss the whole season based off of this, but I can't imagine losing a parent my freshman year of high school.
So does the board have some recommended changes that you would like to see put back in? I mean, I think, and that's one of the reasons why I requested the red line, just to make sure everybody was really clear. This was a complicated policy when we put it in, and we had a lot of questions and conversation. And there was certainly a reason why we had the waiver piece in there, based on some of the things that Mr. Wayne has said. So I'm hearing from Mrs. Fay, item 4A2, on the cumulative GPA. Oh. Is it also under A2? The last sentence on the red line piece?
Under procedures or
Under procedures?
It's under both.
So, okay. And also the waiver piece?
Question. So number 7, eligibility. So students enrolled in less than a full day must, are we saying they don't have to I'm grateful and thankful for Mrs. Godding for asking for the red line, because this wasn't what I was expecting.
Which, tell me what page you're on, number
So,
7?
page 2, sections,
Okay.
number 7. Then it becomes it's not truly a no pass, no play then. It's truly just a GPA requirement. Because if you're saying that that's taken out, then students can fail classes and still be able to play. And again, we're not talking necessarily the implementation, because there's tweaks in all the implementation, but at the end of this, we're saying it's not a no pass, no play. And I can't support that.
I would disagree with that assessment, because any student, regardless if they've got a full schedule or not, if they have a failing grade, have 2 weeks in which to remedy that. If they do not remedy that failing grade, then that student athlete is ineligible for competition until the next grading period, which would be 2 weeks. If still not able to remedy that, still ineligible. So and part of the issue is, and I will tell you, that in dealing with this policy, being brand new to my position, I didn't know how to truly treat that. But the overarching policy is, whether you have 6 classes, you have 8 classes, if you are failing a class at any 2-week period, you have 2 weeks in which to remedy that. So I disagree that it's not a no pass, no fail.
Okay.
Yeah, and if we need to strengthen that language, we sure can. Our intent was to get rid of language that we didn't think was necessary, because now it's every 2 weeks. You either pass or you don't. You're in or you're out. It's actually a little stronger than what you had previously from our perspective. But if it doesn't reflect that, then we'll have to adjust it.
Right. I guess the one thing I heard strongly from ADs at the time and parents, and that's why we went to the cumulative, but that's why we also had the waiver in. I think it's important for our principals and ADs who know those students and know what's going on to have the flexibility for, I guess we can say, a one-time semester waiver. I don't know the language, but I just think it's important.
I'm telling you, you would have agreement from all parties involved at the high school level.
Ms. Williams?
So I just wanted to clarify, so if because I think there's confusion, there's some language in eligibility, and there's also language in exceptions. So if we unredlined under exceptions number 4, would that cure your challenge with this? Which is the waiver.
Yes.
And then
And
Mrs.
I'm sorry, is that the only other major issue for you? I truly believe with those 2 weeks, that makes a huge difference, even at semester. If that, every 2 weeks, that gives, it's more on students and coaches truly to work through that. And from what I read in here, that one exception of a student that's having, their life is falling apart, I honestly don't believe that our coaches or our ADs would have them adhere to this policy that deep, because there's some other issues going on, and so then you're talking about attendance and you're talking about referrals to the county. There's so many other things, so I don't see that how you see that. But if unredlining that part number 4, if that's the fix to this, then let's make that change and do what we got to do.
I have a question on the cumulative GPA piece, because I think, in my memory, we were trying to get kids to be able to play at the college level. So, not having that in there, redlined out, does that have any impact on, I just want to understand that really clearly, on how that child ends up if we take out that cumulative GPA piece? Or should that cumulative GPA be in there so that we don't lose sight of one of the intents, which was the ability to play at a higher level?
The thought process was to have those caring individuals working with the students on a regular basis. So any student that has less than a C grade at any 2-week period is going to receive academic tutoring help. And so those kids will already be on our radar. If you have any grade below a C, which in order to get below a 2.0, you're going to have a D or an F at some time during your academic throughout the year. So those kids will be getting the support that they need. They're on the radar from the coach, from the academic coach, from the athletic director. And then I think that it was the thought process of the athletic directors that let us do our work. Let us provide the support that the child needs to truly get that student in good academic standing above a 2.0 with all, a minimum of C's. In terms of going on to college, the sliding scale and a 2.3, but we think that the 2.0 is a good barometer that was already put in place. We liked that, and so it's now making the academic coaching more of a mandatory piece for any student, not just focusing on failing, but focusing on any grade below a C.
Okay, Mr. Wayne.
Well, this is all, from where this started from to where we are now, I don't want to use the word watered down because you can't just throw a high standard without the support, and we've been saying that from day one. But it's a 2.3 at the NCAA in core classes, so it's not even comparable to what we're talking about. I wish this policy had core classes, by the way, because that would change a lot of things, for good and for bad. But I think it's important to have exceptions to all of our policies because oftentimes it could be an excuse of why a student's not treated one way or another. But two, it's more important that we have a standard that if we put a policy out there, everybody must follow it regardless of the student's circumstance. Because we don't want principals deciding when and when not to follow policy. That can get them in trouble later on. So I think it's important that in this policy we write some flexibility in there to allow principals and ADs to do that. And I think by, as Ms. Williams stated, keeping that in there, even though I think it changes now because it says term, so we have to go 2 weeks or however you guys want to do that. So it won't be just simply as deleting the red line. There's some language issue that needs to be done. But with that being said, the new season is around the corner. So I think there needs to be a motion for the policy with the Section 4 being in the policy as is, and then we come back and fix it and tweak it at a later date because tryouts are going right now and kids need to get ready to start and kids need to know what they're looking for and what they're up against.
And there's always 2 readings, so we can address that in the next one too. Ms. Williams?
I move to approve the athletic eligibility with the exception, the unredlining of under Section B exceptions, item number 4. So I move to approve athletic eligibility final, or the policy, again, with the redlined, trying to say it correctly, item 4 under exceptions.
So there's a motion to approve the academic eligibility policy with item B4 reinstated with adjustments to wording. Is there a second?
Second.
So a motion by Ms. Williams and a second by Mr. Wayne. Is there any other, Mrs. Fay?
That still doesn't address the cumulative GPA of 2.0. I guess I'm not sure why you took that out.
If we're focusing, and once again, I think Dr. Kerberg hit it on the nail on the head, that we're trying to eliminate language. The cumulative GPA, if we're addressing grades below a C every 2 weeks, providing help, that the cumulative eventually is going to move up. How we have the GPA right now is to provide students help, but there's no ineligibility that is tied to the GPA. We believe that if we have the coaches and the academic coaches working with the kids on a consistent and regular basis that need the help, that it will make a difference, and those will be the natural progression. Because we really are monitoring GPA every 2 weeks, every grade below the C, but to continue to work on the term, we thought that the 9 weeks was a good gauge to run that GPA to see where the kids were at.
And I specifically requested that when we wrote this policy initially, because I pulled it from other similar policies around the country where, you're really focused on students who are struggling academically, which is in a lot of areas, and you're trying to build them up and give them support and have them be engaged in school through the activities and sports that keep them coming every day and keep them engaged, which is not necessarily your student who has a cumulative GPA of 2.0. I feel like I need that in there. It's different than what you're talking about to me. It's different. It's for a different student who's maybe has an exceptional circumstance that would cause them to be under the system potentially academically ineligible, but their cum is 2.0, so it's a blip on the screen. It's a bad quarter. It's a whatever. So to me, that really needs to be in there. It needs to be in both places. It needs to be in the procedures, and it needs to be in the other section under implementation? So, or wherever it is, but.
Under eligibility and then.
Yeah, the
Up
procedures
above.
is procedures, eligibility, and then further down in implementation
Right.
under.
Is it under A? The second?
It's
So-
under
Kind of bullet point.
A paragraph
2.
whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Mr. Wayne?
I do recall, I just pulled up the research that we got back then, and it was New Mexico, and New Mexico, the reason they added the cumulative was because students, while participating, did well, and then, for football, let's say, and then second semester didn't do well. And so they still met the requirement by using just current GPA. It was just they would have one good semester and one bad semester. And so they added the word cumulative for the flip of that to make sure that they were still monitoring, our kids still had to be cognitive of all year round. So I do agree with that for the opposite reason of why you stated that cumulative should be in there. So here's the issue that I have right now with all of this. I think we look at what we have right here. We approve it with the understanding of a waiver and cumulative GPA. I think you have to do a second reading tonight. I normally don't agree with that, but November 15th. 16th is a start date, and here's why that's important. Most of our coaches are great, and everybody knows that, but we do have some coaches who will use this to weed out people. We do have some coaches who will use this to put in people, and we can level the playing field by making sure it's every 2 weeks, not 9 weeks, because if I'm a coach, I can't depend on that person as the policy currently is for 9 weeks. And it's hard to build, in this case, basketball, even wrestling, if you know that kid's going to be out for 9 weeks. And so I think we need to, if we're going to change it, we have to do it now and give them some guidance now as they move into the season in 2 weeks. But if you wait till after the season, then kids who maybe got cut, kids who can't get back in the fold. So it's a timing thing, but I do agree with Ms. Fay, but there's a bigger issue. If we're going to change it, which it seems like we all want to go to 2 weeks, that needs to happen before this season starts.
That's why it's on the agenda, because I know basketball's coming up. So, do you want to withdraw your other motion and make a new?
I didn't withdraw it.
I will withdraw my motion, and someone else can make the motion.
So I move, I move to approve the policy that is written before us with the exception of the waiver and/or cumulative GPA.
Okay, so motion on the table to approve the academic eligibility, reinstating the waiver piece and reinstating the cumulative GPA in both the implementation and the procedures section. Is there a second?
Second.
So second by Mrs. Fay. So motion by Mr. Wayne, second by Mrs. Fay. Is there any other discussion?
Question that I would have, and the cumulative GPA is not a problem, but would it be to, if a student has above a 2.0, they would not be required to go to the academic coaching? Are you using that as the filter, that they had one bad quarter, that they're okay? Or on the flip side with Mr. Wayne, that it is more, because the policy is year-round, but I'm hearing two different things on the cumulative GPA.
My perspective, it's both. So if we have a student who is 1.8, my understanding of how we were doing it was they were able to participate as long as they were attending, coaching, and maintaining a 2.0 and above at that time. So it wasn't the be-all, end-all, but that was my understanding, that we're trying to get kids up. But then when the policy is fully implemented, which would be this year's freshmen, is that right?
Freshmen, sophomores.
Freshmen, sophomores, that it would be a cutoff. It would be, if you didn't have a cumulative, it would be a cutoff. But again, that goes back to the waiver, and why we had the waiver is that if there was a student who had a bad freshman year for whatever, or freshman semester for whatever reason, and now a sophomore, you can get that waiver, and it's a good semester should be able to get their grade up.
And I do remember that conversation related to football, so thank you very much. Okay. If nothing else, roll call, Mr. Wayne.
Snow.
Aye.
Underwood.
Aye.
Vargas.
Aye.
Wayne.
Aye.
Williams.
Aye.
Fate.
Aye.
Gadding.
Aye.
America.
Aye.
Scanlon.
Aye.
9-9.
Okay, so motion carries. So at this time,
Move to waive the second reading of not athletic,
eligibility
academic eligibility
policy
policy.
that we just approved. So is there a second to Mr. Wayne's motion?
Second.
Second by Mr. Vargas. Any other discussion on this? I think, Mr. Scanlon?
We meet again in 2 weeks, correct? And I guess I'm just asking why we need to, I know that the season, or what starts on the 16th?
Winter sports
Winter sports?
starts on the 16th, so it would be basketball at the high school level.
And is that practices or games?
That's tryouts.
Tryouts.
So the first time the kids can try out is the 16th.
Okay, so
Swimming and diving and wrestling.
is it essential that the policy be in place tonight as opposed to in 2 weeks?
Students, under the current policy, can still try out. They can still practice. They just cannot participate in games. So I think that we do have some leeway there, although I want to credit Mr. Wayne's thought process that if two athletes have equal talent, one is currently ineligible for 9 weeks, the other one is currently in good standing, sometimes that may sway a coach's decision-making in terms of which athletes to keep. Basketball would be the only winter sport that has cuts.
Will all those decisions be made next Monday, or in 2 weeks on that Monday?
No, the
So
tryout
tryouts-
process is typically multiple days.
So by the time, if we approve this policy in 2 weeks, that coach would have that information before they made cuts?
I think that's a fair statement.
The only thing I would just throw into the mix on that is, and I think we remembered Mr. Dillon standing in front of us, kids aren't even going out because of the 9-week piece. And so they had, 50 less kids try out because they said, it's a 9-week, I can't do it. And so I'm wondering if those students would show up in 2 weeks on that Monday, knowing that it was a 2-week and having that publicly out there. So that would be my question from observing high school students and their activities.
And your point is well taken. There's some education to be done with the student athletes, those involved in the activities, all the coaches and sponsors, as well as the parents. So we do have some work before us to make sure that everybody understands the new policy if approved.
Mr. Scanlon?
And if it's approved tonight, there's usually, I don't know if we've voted down a second reading, but it still allows us to get public comment to come in and to hear from those parties that are affected. I'm guessing that we don't have very many high school students watching the school board meeting, but if they're told, yes, the board voted first round that, yes, it's approved, and they have a very high chance of approving it that next week, that you could start having conversations at the building level with students saying, this is what the, likely changes are coming down, but yet that still allows board members to get input from the community, from students, from parents of these proposed changes.
Ms. Merica, did you have?
I think Mrs. Scotting, you covered about what I was going to say, and that essentially, I would be in agreement with you, Mr. Scanlon, that we should give time to get more feedback on this, but if you're a student and you think, well, I'm not going to be eligible for 9 weeks, the first day of tryouts is that day, and then we change the policy that night, you're probably not going to be able to show up for the second day of tryouts and be like, oh, well, now I can know I'll be eligible for, I only have to sit out 2 weeks. Can I start trying out now? That's just not practical to expect our students to figure that out overnight of, well, I wasn't eligible, now I'm eligible. I can start going on the 17th instead of the 16th.
I don't think that's the case. I mean, they're going to show up on Monday knowing that next Monday night, the policy's 99%
You said there's a
chance.
high likelihood of it being passed. If I was a student, there's a high likelihood. What does that mean? Does that mean, oh yeah, they are going to do it, or does that mean they could potentially change their minds and I went through tryouts for nothing?
One day. I mean, I just think that it's waiving the second reading, I don't think is good board policy.
Appreciated, Mr. Wayne.
We didn't have a second reading for extended day. That's a bigger policy change than this right here. Second, if the policy comes back written, we have to do 2 waivings then too, because it won't be the same policy that was approved tonight, because we approved broad concepts. So if it came back in written language, which is what we're going to have to do anyway, at least I'm going to make, I want to make sure it comes back and we vote on it with the written language. We would have to waive policy we would have to waive second reading next Wednesday because it wouldn't be the exact same thing that we're approving tonight. Right now, we have at least everybody has an understanding, but once the language gets on, it'll be different than what we're approving tonight. So that's my only thought is one, there was a bigger issue we didn't do second reading for, and I generally agree with you all the time on this. I think we've always voted against second reading. In this case, it's just a timing issue where the policy's been out there. The bigger issue is the weekly change, and I think it's just important to get that done.
Mr. Scanlon.
The fact that it was brought to us tonight and we needed a red line to know what we were talking about, and we had two people that didn't know, oh, wait, that's not what my intent was, and now we're passing a broad, okay, well, we're going to unredline this, and we're going to change that. And we've got the people that are proposing it saying, I think that's under this section, and I think it's under this section. That just doesn't give me a whole lot of confidence to pass it without, or pass both readings tonight.
Okay, so I think everybody's given their opinion, which is very good. So we're going to vote, and then we will ask for it to come back at the next board meeting, all typed up, so that we can see it and have it in front of us. And maybe it'll show up on, I don't know, where we can put it, consent or wherever.
Appreciate your time.
Vote, Ms. Teray.
Underwood?
Can you clarify, this is to, the motion was to waive this second reading, correct?
Correct.
Aye.
Vargas?
Aye.
Wayne? Williams?
Aye.
Fay?
Aye.
Gadding?
Aye.
America?
Aye.
Scanlon?
No.
Snow?
Aye.
8 aye.
Okay, motion carries, and so I would just ask staff to clean it all up, and if you would, please send it out to us ahead of time so that everybody can look at it, and then if there's any other cleanup, we can get that done before the board meeting. Thank you all for your patience on that and your understanding of the winter sports season that's upon us. Ms. Williams.
I move that the Board of Education go into closed session for the protection of the public interest and for the prevention of needless injury to the reputation of individuals, to discuss with the superintendent, secretary to the board, Dr. Turnquist, Mark Warnicki, and legal counsel, legal advice, real estate, personnel, and negotiations.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Ms. Williams, second by Mrs. Underwood. Roll call, please.
Vargas?
Aye.
Wayne? Williams?
Aye.
Fay?
Aye.
Gadding?
Aye.
America?
Aye.
Scanlon?
Aye.
Snow? Underwood?
Aye.
9 aye.
Motion carries. Let me remind the board that the purpose for closed session is for the protection of the public interest and for the prevention of needless injury to the reputation of individuals, to discuss with the superintendent, secretary to the board, Dr. Turnquist, Mark Warnicki, and legal counsel, legal advice, real estate, personnel, and negotiations. Let the record reflect that the board went into closed session at 10:21 p.m.